I'm looking at my TV monitor right now, and Karl Rove is up there speaking about last night's results. There we go. I almost said election and results all at once, saying election. He's talking about the results from Nevada. Why does anybody listen to Karl Rove? I I got to tell you, and why is he somehow used by Fox and the Wall Street Journal as being the epitome of the Washington insider with all of the knowledge that we need to know? I thought the guy was useless when he worked for President Bush, and he's been pretty much useless ever since. And it just seems he makes a living off of just bloviating. Oh, sorry. Well, I guess I understand now. 907, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 30. On our way, at least close to 50 today, 52 tomorrow, and then over the course of the next several days, I think we have some rain on Saturday that'll depress the temperature a bit. Sometimes rain depresses me too, but not this time of year. We'll have a high of 45 on Saturday, but otherwise, we have really a string of days. Into next week, we'll be warming up into the mid 50s and perhaps even higher. I want to thank you for joining us on the program today. Do you ever wonder why media, and in this day and age, with all the people, especially bloviators and talk radio, criticizing media, why media still can't learn the lesson that trying to hoodwink the public is a bad idea? This is from a website called CBC. That stands for Canadian Broadcasting Company. I grew up close enough to the Canadian border where we watched CBC on TV and we could also listen to CBC radio. And frankly, it's a very liberal institution. Long before we even talked about liberal media in the States, liberal media was being pioneered in Canada. And the headline said that, nearly half of Canadians believe that global warming is not man-made. Now, we think about Canadians as being terribly liberal. Whenever I see surveys come out of Canada, though, it's not so liberal as it's often portrayed. While 79% of Canadians do not doubt the reality of climate change, the writer says, 39% don't believe it is caused by human activity. Well, now, see, they're giving you a number here and saying, well, it's less than half. But I wrote a little note to myself just underneath that. I wrote 56%. Why did I do that? Now, down here it says 44% of Canadians surveyed believe Earth is getting warmer, mostly because of human activities. Well, that's less than half, too. So why isn't that mentioned in the headline? Because when they were asking this, you ever see these surveys where it will say, they'll give you a question, then they want to know if you agree, or strongly agree, not sure, disagree, or strongly disagree? So 39% here represents I believe that it was the strongly agree column. And then there were additionals, which brought it up to, if you just agree but not strongly agree, brings it up to 56% of Canadians surveyed don't believe global warming is man-made. Now, why wouldn't they give us that number? Well, we strongly agree versus disagree, and it's two different things. No, I'm sorry, but you wrote a headline here, and the object was to try to claim that these goofballs, less than half of them, believe we have nothing to do with global warming. But as it turns out, well over half actually do believe it. So they've gone ahead and they put this together, and they know in this day and age, people don't get a chance to read everything. So a lot of times, have you ever posted something to Facebook? I know some of you may Facebook, what's that? Or why would I bother? I do it because it's part of my job. You post a headline, and sometimes it's called clickbait. I will write a headline, the idea being that I'm trying to draw people in, and then I will make the counter argument. But I often see people that they'll get infuriated with me, and they'll write comments about my headline, but they've not looked at anything I wrote. Now they know this at CBC too. So when the CBC actually puts that up there and says, well, it's far less than half, believe it's they're those deniers, they're those kooks over there. But it turned out the number was actually much higher. And then I saw a result of a survey that was done in South Carolina following the primary there. And some liberal organization came out and said, among the Republicans who voted in the South Carolina primary on Saturday, 70% favor amnesty for illegal immigrants. Well, then why are they voting for Donald Trump in such large numbers? Well, how did they ask the question? And I saw a breakdown on that this morning. They were asked questions about people who were already here working in jobs and who have been here working in jobs for years and who are known as hard workers. But then they didn't bother asking about the people who've just recently crossed the border and show up and try to take other people's jobs. And then there were numerous other breakdowns I read about in this in this criticism of that story that actually detailed that if you actually get to the nub of things, no, that is not the case. 70% of people in South Carolina, and Democrats are very conservative in that state for the most part too, but they did not say that. They were asked a question, and the headline left out a few certain elements of the details of the question. And media does this all the time. And media wonders why it's not trusted. Media wonders why, when it tells people, don't vote for this candidate, no one listens to them. Politicians aren't trusted anymore. So when a Nikki Haley comes out and says, don't vote for Donald Trump, even though she's a so-called popular governor in her state, people turn around and they vote for Donald Trump. And endorsements are rather useless. And I don't mean to criticize Raul Labrador, but he campaigned with Ted Cruz in Nevada, and Labrador is a very popular figure on the American right and among the old Tea Party movement. And yet his endorsement yesterday meant very little because Donald Trump walked away with his biggest margin of victory so far, 46%. And yet they still keep going back to the old playbook. Well, we'll just put this headline in here that will convince people otherwise. Or, because I'm such a big important name, I'll give an endorsement and everyone will go, well, gee willikers, I better vote the exact same way. And yet it's not working. And the definition of insanity, the old line says, is to continue to do the same thing and getting the same result, but still somehow expecting a different result. So a great many people in the establishment in this country are definitely insane. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program today by dialing 736-0300, 736-0300. Speaking of insane, this is a candidate running as a Democrat. She's appearing yesterday in South Carolina at something called the Mothers Forum. And I know a lot of people, when they hear Hillary Clinton's name, say, yeah, that mother. But she's speaking there, and she's promising that if you vote for her, a Democrat, vote for her in the South Carolina primary, she is going to ensure, especially if you're a black person, that you get a lot more free stuff.
We need to break down all the barriers in our economy and society that hold people back and disproportionately hold back African Americans. We need to do a better job of listening when African Americans talk about the seen and unseen barriers they face every day.
Unseen and seen barriers, and in other words, you vote for me and I'll rob the public treasury for you. Bernie can't do any better than that now, can he? You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Good morning, Bill. Well, the global warming hoax, and that's what it is used to control us. And, of course, it comes right out of the United Nations Agenda 21, the same organization that's bringing us the refugees and bringing us world government, gun control, the whole bit. But most U.S. scientists are on record. There's over 30,000 have signed a petition against man-caused global warming. You will never hear that. And, of course, all of us that are scientific oriented or educated realize that the planet's gone through all these changes over the years. And even in my lifetime, I've seen, hot areas and hot, cold areas and anything in between. So they can't even predict 48 hours down the road. And all 73 of the United Nations climate models have been proven wrong. I mean, 0 for 73. They're using $360 billion worldwide to convince us of a hoax in order to control our energy, our economies, in the process of making this country, of course, a third world nation, so we can merge into this glorious, tyrannical New World Order United Nations.
Well, this morning I read a headline on Real Clear Politics. It's, of course, they're an aggregator. They link to a lot of other headlines. The headline was from a liberal publication, and it said this: the seas are rising now faster than they've ever risen before. Yet it completely ignores the story last week, which was reported that the sea level rise that had been predicted didn't happen because the continents absorbed it. Now, which one is it? And so you had the story last week. It got maybe a day of play, and they've got scientific evidence backing that up. And yet here you go. A week later, you've got the liberals saying, pay no attention to that. Things are really bad.
Well, if Al Gore really believed the oceans were going to rise 20 feet, why would he buy beachfront property in California? Yeah, seriously. Glenn Beck said, well, they need to furnish him with a 20-foot snorkel, so he can enjoy his beachfront property.
I think it was the Senator Byron Dorgan. He was out of North Dakota. When he retired from office, he got a sweetheart deal he sat on a banking committee. He got a sweetheart deal on a mortgage for a beach home, and he bought a house on a barrier island out on the East Coast. And yet he was one of the biggest mouths on Capitol Hill when it came to this global warming issue.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, they're making jillions, literally billions of dollars. Al Gore has become extremely wealthy over this thing. But, folks, CO2 is not causing any problem with our planet. Our plants are actually starved for CO2. They need about 4 times as much as they have now. Commercial greenhouses pump it in and turn on the grow lights at night and get those plants out to us in the seasonal order. But the whole fact is, without CO2, we do not have any food to eat, and we do not have any oxygen to breathe. It's a process of photosynthesis, and the little amount of CO2 that's in the atmosphere is certainly not toxic. It is not causing any kind of global climate change. It's a total hoax.
I thank you much for the telephone call, sir. And the telephone number is 736-0300. A minute before the break, we'll squeeze one more caller in this segment. You're up next, and you're on air.
I wish I could just talk to the guy, the last caller. I have always been curious. I'm not a smart person, but I've hauled carbon dioxide and I've hauled compressed air. I've hauled compressed oxygen. Carbon dioxide is very heavy compared to the other gases. So I've always wondered, how on earth is a high level of carbon dioxide going to end up way up in the atmosphere from down here? I'm sure somebody can answer that, but
yeah, that's
I've
a good
always
question.
wondered.
That's a good question. It's not like big 16-ton weights are hanging out of the sky. Yeah, they fall when you put them up there.
That's right.
Thank you much for the call.
Answer, but I'm just curious.
Well, it's very logical, and I thank you for the call. Have you ever put ice cubes in a glass? And when the ice cubes melt, does the glass overflow? No. No, it doesn't happen. So, again, I'm just telling you, you could observe that. We used to observe that, I think, in the 6th grade in science class. And yet we're told we've got to believe this. Meanwhile, all of your power brokers are all buying up all the beachfront property, but they don't want you there. Oh, I get it. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Speaking of the left in this country, political correctness. And also I mentioned Canada earlier. Yes, that's a very politically correct country. I'll share a couple of stories from both sides of the border, and you wonder why you're bothering to pay all that money for a college education.